Hey everyone, so I wanted to do something a little bit different in this video, and I'm going to use an agile methodology to talk about some of the aims of spiritual development. So if you are familiar with agile methodology, this is originally began as like a manifesto in the IT world, like in the early 2000s. And it's basically where you get these ideas of like having like a minimum viable product and just sort of just doing the minimum and then quickly getting feedback and reiterating, and it can become like a more efficient way of operating. And since then, like the whole business world has really adopted it. And I just thought that was like kind of relevant for this approach because the whole topic of spiritual development is obviously huge, and it depends on the context and the scope we're going to get into. And for my purposes and for my based on like my experience and the kind of expertise I share, and I kind of see myself working within a certain bandwidth of this like hugely vast area. So what I wanted to talk about when I talk about our spiritual development is just in relation to just working very practically in relationship with our own higher self. And so I wanted to talk about the higher self, and specifically like finding ourselves in increasing alignment with our higher self and how we do that and what's at stake, what is the process for doing this basically. This builds on my previous video, which I believe like I uploaded July 23rd, so right before this one. And I was talking about cultivating the coherence of consciousness, specifically like bringing experience together into a point of awareness. And awareness, of course, being something distinct from consciousness, which is like a much vaster phenomenon, very foundational, whereas awareness can be, dialed in and focused in different ways. Bringing awareness together, bringing experience together rather, into a moment of awareness, this requires like a certain level of energy. There is a baseline energetic attainment, is the way that I like to think about it. The more that you want to bring into awareness, you literally like this requires literally more energetic investment. And I feel like we don't hear this angle on it so much. But in from my experience, this has become like very obvious. It's and it's useful too for the way this can connect with the way that we are already discussing, your frequency and your vibration, because it's quite literal. There's a direct parallel here with the way that we talk about raising our vibration, or rather, more accurately, maybe raising our frequency. With a higher frequency, like you're literally running more energy. You can hold more of your own energetic field in awareness. At this level, you've also got, by definition, you have an increasingly greater degree of coherence, because that's going to be a corollary basically of having that much energy in awareness. Coherence, of course, is like tightly linked with integration, because the more that we have been able to integrate, literally, the more energy we will have available to us. Here is where like I would maybe start to go out on a little bit of a limb. This is where the agile framework comes in. This needs like some reiteration. This is like a really quick sketch. But basically, from like my intuitive familiarity so far, basically, like just as we know that like white light is composed of many different variations, many different rays of light can combine to produce white light at a higher level of energy. So I think there's something analogous happening with our own energetic field, where we can achieve something similar by integrating more of it, by bringing more of it into conscious coherence. And I just think that this is definitely directly linked with the concept of having a light body and developing our light body as developed in Tibetan traditions of thought. And of course, a light body becomes like our vessel after death. But if the light body represents that level or degree of energetic coherence, coherence of conscious awareness, then I think we can like extrapolate even further from that to taking into consideration all of our incarnations, for example, or all of our versions, perhaps in simultaneous dimensions, however we are distributed. And so there's going to be another level of coherence that perhaps we can attain or interact with beyond just our individual light body. Or it may be that our light body is also already in coherence with what we may consider as our higher self. And so here, you know, different scholars may get into some like hair splitting on how we're going to define the higher self, how we're going to imagine this. But I just think for our purposes, it's useful to just think about this as like the next level of coherence beyond, for example, our own light body and or across incarnations, across dimensions, as it were. And the value in this is that, of course, we can then access further knowledge, further wisdom that we already possess on that level. And so, just to try to wrap this up, bring this full circle, the point to this is that spiritual development for our purposes is just concerned with like these two key concepts. Obviously, our coherence, which is founded on our ability to integrate, and then alignment, which is aligning ourselves with our own higher alignment, with our own higher coherence. So this is really, you can see like the kind of fractalized nature of this process at any given scale that you zoom in or zoom out. It's the same type of process of like moving towards coherence and really like healing the fragmentation that comes from like living in this density. So that's what I would say in like super broad strokes at this within this bandwidth is really like the essence of what spiritual development is directed towards. And then of course, you know, you can think back to what I've already discussed in some other videos on fragmentation, especially the way the matrix is kind of like set up to fragment our cognition, our consciousness. It literally can't recognize consciousness. So that's really like a baseline kind of spiritual test also. Anyway, so I hope this has been useful. There's a lot of other details that we could get into, but I feel like they just all fit within this framework and they kind of like fall out of it as consequences or that's already entailed. You know, for example, you could get into quantum systems theory, and then when you're at a certain level of coherence, you know, that's when you can really like tap into entanglement, because that's not working at every level. That's not just like de facto always available. Like it's not just de facto available at a macroscopic level. Like there's certain conditions that are in place that you have to attain. And so coherence is really like more than a metaphor in this sense. It's very literal and it like tracks across different scales of analysis. And then maybe I'll just leave you with one more example for how we can think about this, because I just saw another clip from Interstellar, another Christopher Nolan film. And, you know, the character was talking about love being the one thing that we can perceive that transcends space and time. And so that's really analogous here because that's what we're doing when we are aligning with the higher self. That's the whole point of like trying to literally transcending space and time is basically overcoming this fragmentation and moving into coherence, because I think it's through coherence that we can begin to access those other dimensions. And that's also fitting because there are studies on cases of all kinds of love between very closely connected individuals and the types of coherence that then ensue. So clairvoyance, claircognizance, all kinds of like shared communications that work beyond our usual sensory limitations. So maybe I'll leave you guys with this one exercise, which is to try to think about and list out all of the previous moments in your life where you feel that you have attained, or moments of the highest coherence that you've been able to attain. Whether this was in some kind of memorable flow state, or it might have taken on a different quality. Maybe it didn't feel like flow, but it was more of like a momentary flash, like a flash of awareness, but a very strong experience of higher coherence, higher understanding. You were in touch with higher knowledge about your purpose or your life or the meaning of where you were and when and the overall picture. It might have felt like having a kind of momentary bird's eye view on your life where you were kind of like looking down on yourself as if a third person, or it might have come in any other form of altered state of consciousness. You may experience this in a near death experience. I've had moments of this after waking up from certain dreams and so on. So try to find, however many of these you've had, like try to just list them out, even if just like super briefly, and try to like remember what knowledge you gained or what message you felt at the time that you were receiving. Again, so think about like your highest energy states. Maybe it didn't feel like a state of flow, but it was like a super high energy state, really, really charged, either with like love or like super high vibrations of some sort. And this may take some time. Like maybe first do this in stages. Like you might want to just like list this out really quickly. And then as you have the energy or the focus, you can go back and like fill in more of the details. And then I would even like, I'm getting the image of a kind of, put this into like a kind of like, the color wheel or any type of like, whether this is like a pie chart kind of configuration where you're like, um, putting all of these experiences kind of like side by side. And so like visually integrated, and then just kind of see like, maybe you want to play with that. Like you want to like order them. Maybe they form certain natural groupings, but just having this kind of like visual integration. Maybe it's a grid for you. Maybe you want to do it like kind of like a square grid, but doing something where you're kind of like visually bringing them together, not just like a list, but either square or circle, or maybe it's a cube. And I just feel that you're going to get some really good insights with doing that. And whether it's finding what's in common with many of these experiences, or maybe they are charting out a type of narrative, a type of pattern, or simply you might just get like a brand new download about or from your own higher awareness. So give that a try. That's the exercise, and let me know how it goes. I'd love to hear about this. This is a super deep topic. Like I said, this is the agile version. So I would go over this and fill in some more details, but this is like the really quick sketch just to give you guys this. So let me know what you think.